So Whitehall staff clearly enjoyed the hot spell this week. 80% of civil servants across 3 departments worked from home on Wednesday, with only around 900 of the near 4,000 desks being occupied. This came in the same week that a national newspaper reignited the debate over whether those who choose to work from home should be paid less than their office-based employees. Elliot Keck is the investigations campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, and he joins me now. Welcome to the show. So, Elliot, you've authored a report this week, or it's been published this week. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so we had the Daily Mail front page on Monday. We looked into not just the number of council staff that are working from home. Everybody kind of knows about that already. But we wanted to look at the number of council staff that were being allowed to work from abroad.
Yes.
Potentially even from the beach. And we found that...
well, actually on the beach?
Well, we don't have conclusive proof of that.
OK.
But, you know, I'm sure there are some examples.
Yes.
And we found that since 2020, 1,358 staff have been allowed to work from abroad. That's in places like Spain, Italy, France, Australia, Brazil...
Really?
Basically anywhere with a hot and sunny climate.
Well, you'd see why they'd want to.
I can understand it, yeah. I mean, listen, if you're being told by your boss there's no need to come into the office, you can work from home 5 days a week, maybe come in once a month. Then,
yes.
Yeah, absolutely, why not go to your friend's, you know, house in Sardinia or wherever it is. But I think...
you have good friends.
Yeah, well, I'd very much like those friends. But it's a random example, but I'm not sure it's the best thing for taxpayers.
No, well, this has happened across the board. All sorts of companies and corporations are now sort of suggesting, since the pandemic, people should be working from home more. What does that do, though, to a company, to that sort of collegiate sense within any, particularly in a body like the civil service? Yeah,
and interestingly, actually, some of those companies are now starting to reverse tack. You're seeing even Zoom, actually, ask their employees to come back into the office, which is not a ringing indictment of their own software.
No.
So I think, listen, clearly hybrid working has a place in society. Clearly the pandemic did demonstrate that things could be done with some hybrid working. But nevertheless, if you take a local council, for example, you need people in that local council to understand the issues of their area.
Yes.
Sometimes you actually need them in the office so you know that they're picking up the phones. And so I think there does need to be a little bit of a course correction on some of this stuff.
It's slightly more important when it comes to Whitehall as opposed to just, you know, some corporations or bodies or companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's Whitehall, but also local councils. I mean, Whitehall deal with things like benefits, immigration. You know, I mean, take for example, we've had a crisis recently with a prisoner escaping. We've had crises in places like Afghanistan. And what we've found, or in the education department, and what we've found when we look at some of those departments that are going through these crises, we're finding that 40–50% of staff are in during the weeks that these crises are happening.
Yes.
And you do wonder, you know, when you're in an emergency situation and you're thinking you really need to dial up productivity and make sure it's all hands on deck, is it really appropriate that half of that very expensive office that taxpayers are paying for is empty?
Yeah, and also, you know, you have to be kept abreast of things, and often that just comes through day-to-day conversation within the office. I mean, that's really the reason. The other thing is, studies seem to be suggesting that working from home, well, people abuse that system. People spend time in bed, they play computer games, and that, it sounds flippant, but it seems to be confirmed that this is the case. I guess that's just human nature.
It absolutely is. Ultimately, if you know that your boss is not going to see what you're doing, and if you know that you can demonstrate a basic minimum level of competence and hit a couple of the key KPIs, the natural thing to do is to think, OK, maybe I don't need to go to the extra mile, because ultimately they're not going to see anyway.
Yes.
And I think, you know, in particular, when you look at the council staff abroad work, you know, there's one council staff member, for example, that was allowed to work from Spain from June to August, 2 summers running. And you're really wondering, is that actually necessary? And are they going to be really working to the maximum of their capability?
I think we know the answer.
Well, exactly. And listen, there will be cases where, you know, maybe you're a very senior member of staff and you're taking annual leave.
Yes.
You want to be able to log on just to keep an eye on things, and actually, fine, fair enough. Or maybe you're going to see an ill family member and you don't want to force them to take annual leave, and they can do a bit of work. So there is, you know, as with all of these things, hybrid working, working from abroad, working from home, there is flexibility here.
Yes.
But clearly, you know, we're giving, particularly public sector's workers, an inch, and they're very much taking a mile at the moment.
And have you had any particular feedback or fallout from your article on the Daily Mail front cover? How have people react?
We have had some people say that they think it's a great thing that councils allow this, that it makes these councils a very attractive place to work, which to some extent it does, but that doesn't mean it's good for residents, that doesn't mean it's good for taxpayers, and ultimately a council's absolute priority, Whitehall's absolute priority, the public sector's priority has to be the people that funds them and not the people that simply work there.
It just strikes me that it's not good PR. And particularly when you have this story about on Wednesday, the hottest day, when the civil servants just didn't bother going... Well, not didn't bother, but they were working from home, or they were at the the pub in the beer garden, let's be honest.
Well,
That kind of thing, particularly with the civil service, because the civil service is widely mistrusted and seen to be overly politicised and not really doing its job. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I mean, listen, personally, I was very keen to go into the office last week because we had air conditioning. And so the idea of being in an air-conditioned room was a treat.
Yes.
Now, a lot of those civil service departments will have air conditioning. If they're not going into the office, you're actually wondering, are they sitting in their hot and stuffy flat, house, whatever it is, or are they maybe, taking their phone with their emails to the park or, as you say, to the beer garden? It does really make you wonder.
And people, it does generate particular resentment, I think, when it comes to people who work in those kinds of jobs. Yeah,
and listen, I don't think this would be anywhere near as much of a problem if services were actually being run really well.
Yes.
People could get a GP appointment if the police turned up when you called them and actually, investigated crimes. I'm not sure this would be a scandal, but there's a sense that we have a 70-year high tax burden, a point we always like to make, but at the same time, services seem to be running at their lowest level for quite some time, and there's a mismatch there.
Is that a sort of endemic problem in terms of efficiency that you think can be resolved, and how can it be resolved?
Well, I think, one of the first things we need to do is we need to look at traditional working practices, the things that we know produce an efficient, relatively better run public sector. And some of those things are actually quite fundamental. It's just, are you in the office?
Yes.
And listen, as I said, maybe people can work from home 1 or 2 days a week, but I think, those sorts of people that, go in for an afternoon once a fortnight, I think that's where we do need to start making amends.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Elliot Keck, thank you so much for joining me.